Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. Now, our new mini series will be on Davos Economic Forum that happened in January, I think. And
Yeah.
yeah, we'll be discussing some of the things that happened there. Um,
Sure.
but firstly, I'd like to talk about Mark Carney's speech. It's a speech that's made headlines around the world, I think, and
hmm
we'll discuss how it is. I personally think quite highly of it, but yeah, we'll see for ourselves how it is. Um, so. Um, so basically, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney made a speech at Davos about the new or the rupture of the old world order, and it's a speech that's made headlines around the world. As we can see here, very
hmm
famous news outlets like New York Times and BBC have reported on it, and some have coined it a speech for the history books, and that's relatively high praise. I also watched it quite a few times, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So yeah, let's jump to his speech.
Sure.
So Gemma, what did you think about his speech?
Mm, I think it was a really good speech in terms of like the language of the speech and like the emotion he appealed. But I think in terms of the message of the speech, I think that is a more debatable topic, and which is what we're gonna do like today. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I personally I generally like listening to speeches from leaders at these conferences. And when I was listening to his, I really found that it was very I would say intriguing because I didn't have to force myself listen to the whole speech. I just generally wanted to know what he was going to say next. Unlike some leaders, when I listen to their speeches, I have to force myself to continue listening and not to do something else. So I think yeah, it was quite a decent speech, but of course the message we can go deeper into later.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Even
now,
for like somebody
yeah,
like me who like doesn't like listen to speeches or like international conferences, like those sort of thing a lot, I definitely think that the speech like worth the time, and I'm really like into this as well. Yeah.
that's good. Yeah, so now we can start talking about the speech and some of its details.
hmm
So yeah, so this is the first part of his speech, and his first part was in French, and I think this is something that leaders of multilingual countries like to do, especially countries where there are multiple official languages. For example, I remember when I was watching um, Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, his inauguration speech, he also started in like Malay and then Chinese or Mandarin, and then only then did he go on to speak in um, English. So yeah, I think that's something that multi these leaders of these multilingual countries like to do. And I of course didn't understand it when I was listening to it, but then I read this transcript and I think, actually, even though it's in like French and perhaps not everyone could understand it, I think it's quite an important piece of his speech because I would say it's like a summary and perhaps even the thesis of his speech. Especially like he talks about uh, like he lays out what he's going to talk about, right? The rupture in the world order, um, the end of pleasant fiction, harsh reality. So it's a speech. So I think like even though I couldn't understand it, and generally I think especially to the English speaking audience, people are unable to understand the first part of this speech or the first part of these speeches by leaders of lingual countries. I think they are quite important. I didn't think they were very important in the past, but now I think I used to think they were like purely symbolic, but now it seems like they do have some function in the speech. And it's kind of a pity that I wasn't able to understand that. But yeah,
hmm
um, I'm also kind of curious because, like, I know Mark Carney speaks French, and I think all Canadian leaders speak French more or less, but I'm kind of curious how good Mark Carney's French is because I've like looked at some of his videos on Instagram and he doesn't seem that fluent, but I don't know because I don't know French, but
I don't
when
know
he
French either.
Yeah, but when he speaks French, it's like the words just jump out one after another. They don't seem very fluent or connected, but that's just my opinion. I don't really know French. Um,
Maybe
yeah.
it's like similar to Macron's English, I would say.
Oh, similar to Macron's English. Okay. Yeah, that probably makes sense. I guess he's probably not as good as French as Justin Trudeau because Justin Trudeau's from Quebec. I think he's probably pretty good at French, but oh, that's not that important. Um, but I think another thing that's important to see from what his from this first small part of his speech, which was in French, is that it really sets the tone and it's a very realist speech. It doesn't go over like glossing over what's happened recently, but rather it does set a pretty serious tone. Like he uses phrases like great power rivalry. Uh,
I agree.
did he use them in this part? Oh, I don't think they used them. That he used them in this part, but um, throughout his speech, and I think especially at the beginning of his speech, he used phrases like "great power rivalry," and then he used phrases like "the strong can do what they can, and the weak must suffer what they must." So I think listening to this speech at first, it really did hit me that this speech was perhaps somewhat different from what other European leaders were saying in rather placating tones. Here, I think he was really, it was a very realist beginning to his speech. And I think he set a very serious tone and really set the tone for his speech. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. I do want to point out like the part I've highlighted like in the speech. So to what
Mm.
extent do you think like this is actually like a reflection of like Mark Carney and the Labour government's like foreign policy like agenda or something? Is that like intermediate powers like Canada, like they have to like respect for human rights, sustainable development, like so to what extent do you think like the government has actually achieved those goals or like aiming to achieve those goals, like both in terms of like in domestic and foreign arenas?
That's a very good question. Actually, first things first, he's from the Liberal Party, not the Labour Party.
Oh, that's my bad. I'll cut it off.
The second thing is, yeah, I think I actually don't know what I don't really know that much about what he's done domestically in Canada. I think he talks about what he's done in Canada at the end of the speech when he's like advertising Canada as a good partner. But I don't really know what he's done domestically. But I think and internationally, I think one thing that's certain is that he is engaging in various countries. He also
Mhm.
goes on to list those achievements later on in the speech, but things that I do remember are I think he's signed deals with Canada, no, with China, with Qatar, with and also he's engaging in closer cooperation with his allies in Europe. So I think he certainly is engaging. But whether I don't, whether he thinks that Canada, I think one thing about Carney is that I think he does genuinely believe in these ideals because
Mhm.
he was like Harvard educated, Oxford educated. Like I think he was rather. I think he's I don't really know that much about him, but I do think he's like he does believe in them, or at least he's a more conventional politician. Like former U.S. presidents also, at least on paper or on television, believed in these ideals. Um, so I think at the very least he's that kind of a politician. He's not a politician that um, he's not really like Donald Trump who doesn't believe in any of these ideals. I think, but
But Donald Trump is
yeah.
also Penn educated, you know.
Oh yeah, he is Penn educated, so um
Yeah, so I
oh
don't think
actually
like
I
the Harvard educated says so much about like his ideals.
oh
So
yeah. But I did read a paper about hypocrisy in the international order a few days ago. And I
mhm,
think it made a pretty interesting argument that it's the conclusion of the argument isn't very relevant here.
mhm.
The conclusion was like hypocrisy both limited but also helps US dominance. Um, but at least I don't think the current U.S. administration is very interested in that. Um, I think so. I personally think, or at least I hope, Carney believes in these ideals. But I think at the very least, he's like a more conventional Western politician who at least espouses these ideals and seems to act according to them. But whether he believes them or not in his heart, of course, up to debate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, for me, like you said, this like opening was kind of like setting a realistic and a realism tone, actually. Well, I think like somehow like this sentence somehow is like more of an idealistic like agenda or like idealistic envisions of Carney or and the liberal
Mm,
government. Mhm. So, because I think
mm,
like yes, he is like pushing for like sovereignty and territorial integrity. That's of course as we will probably discuss later in the podcast. But I'm actually like more skeptical about whether he is like actually like wholeheartedly committed to ideas such as like sustainable development or respect for human rights. Especially you
mm,
consider like the actual like the environmental laws that he has like promulgated since his inauguration and like the economic cooperation with so much country. I do think that he is committed to those. He like supports those ideas to a certain extent, but I also think that there are certain more like important priorities for Carney, like basically like economic growth or something like that. So I think that this is still like somehow pretty idealistic. I think this also ties into the idea of like the value-based realism. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, I'm not sure about the rest, but I think I watched a short video on WeChat
Mhm.
the other day about Mark Carney and climate change. I think he's quite into climate change, because I think he used to be like a UN special envoy on climate change or something. Um, but I think recently he he I think he shifted away from some Trudeau era
Yeah,
policies
yeah.
on climate change, like carbon tax, I think, but I'm not like completely sure.
I think it's
Um,
carbon tax, and he is also pushing for another like oil pipeline or something like that because
oh
like
yeah, I
Canada
think
has like undeveloped
yeah,
oil reserves.
in what Alberta? I'm not sure,
Yeah,
but
maybe. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So at least he believes in climate change. I think he believes that it's a thing,
Yeah, yeah,
unlike
yeah,
some other
yeah.
views. Yeah, yeah, maybe.
That's for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. But he is under some pressure in Canada. But I think he's doing quite well in Canada, actually. But yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Mm.
Um,
So shall we move on?
yeah, yeah, we can move on.
Hmm.
So yeah, he started his part in English with a few generalities, and then he went into this metaphor, which I found to be quite interesting. So he talks about this. He talks about the Czech dissident. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Václav Havel. Well, I don't think that's correct, but yeah, he's talking about this Czech dissident, later president, in his essay, "The Power of the Powerless," where he asks a very simple question, and that's how did the communist system, I believe he's referring to the communist system in the USSR, sustain itself. And he uses this story about the greengrocer um, who puts a sign in his window every morning um, saying "Workers of the world unite." And he doesn't believe it, nobody does, but they do it to signal compliance to get along with their lives. And because everyone does this, the system persists. And Abel calls it living within a lie. And then he draws parallels with this. He draws parallels, by analogy, he draws parallels with the uh, rules based world order that has been prevalent in the world, I think, since the end of the Second World War, but I'm not that certain. But for a long time. And I personally thought it was quite a decent analogy because
Hmm.
like these
Yeah.
countries, especially Western countries, but really in general countries all around the world, played along with this and put the sign in the wall in the put the sign up and also participated in the rituals and praised its principles and joined its institutions and really benefited from it. So I thought it was a really good metaphor, and it was a good way to start the speech and to start talking about what you want to talk about later on. What do you think of the metaphor?
I think like from a message standpoint, that definitely get his message across.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, but I really think like what Carney is trying to say is that like somebody has to be like the first to like protest like the end of the
Someone has to,
world
yeah,
order, and that country is Canada. That is what he is doing right now, and I think that is at least my understanding of this anecdote.
yeah.
Mm,
I think it's also quite interesting to think about why Canada is the first one to to speak up, and I would perhaps we can discuss it later. But my feeling is why Canada was the first one to stand up. The one reason is that I think Mark Carney he does have some personal courage and sagacity to make these observations and to give the speech. But I think on the other hand, it's also because Canada is slightly more desperate than all of the other, well, not desperate, but like in more dire straits than other countries. Because, like for example, the European Union, because Canada is uniquely vulnerable because it's the closest ally both in terms of uh, geography and also integration, which he talks
yeah,
about as a threat. And Canada does rely quite a bit on the US, and it doesn't have, like, unlike the European Union, it has like the European Union single market is still relatively powerful. I think it can retaliate to some extent, but I don't think Canada would be able to do that on their own. And on the other hand, like, yeah, so I think both economically and also militarily, however unlikely any military action is, I think Canada is more vulnerable than almost all other U.S. allies. So I think this also played a part in this because Canada, in order to survive and thrive and be able to stand up to some of the threats the U.S. government is making, I think it's important for Canada to be able to find allies and partners from around the world, and that's what Carney wanted to do with this speech.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I think like for the countries that have the closest tie with the US, it's basically like Canada plus a bunch of countries in Europe. But yeah, like from my observation, I think like European Union on the whole is still like a bit too, I would say, disunited and chaotic to like put any or like sufficient like foreign policy like response that makes sense to the US. And in terms of like I know that there's still like disagreement like among European countries like those between like Italy, Germany, and France. I think there's
Yeah.
still like quite significant disagreement. And in terms of like individual response, I think like Macron kind of wants to fight back, but I also think like France as a country as a whole certainly lacks the like economic power of European Union as a whole and can really do little. And yeah, and for the
Yeah.
United Kingdom, I think Starmer was still like trying to like appease Donald Trump. I don't know if this is the right word, but yeah, UK and US does have like I would say they also have like a more closer relationship, but I think the relationship was less economic and more like technologically or like militarily like connected.
hmm Yeah,
Yeah.
I watched Starmer's press conference on Greenland, and they were like all the reporters were asking him like how far does the US have to go before Starmer can say something rather strong in response. And Starmer kept repeating that it's in their national interest to cooperate with the United States because of the very close relationship they have in, I think, like
See,
economically, culturally, and also more importantly, militarily, and like the nuclear arsenal or something like that. So yeah, it
yeah,
does seem that um
yeah.
he's in quite a spot. But I mean, a few days later, he did use relatively strong language to condemn Trump's comments on uh British soldiers in Afghanistan. I think he called it frankly appalling, I think. So I mean, I think Germany, Friedrich Merz, I think the chancellor also wanted to show some resistance to maybe retaliation. But I think the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, I think she was one to say that they shouldn't go and try to stand up or fight Trump because it'll only bring bad results. And I
Hmm.
still think that the European Union is like it's not as vulnerable as Canada is because Canada is just
Yeah.
so close.
Yeah, I think like Friedrich Merz has been famously described as a transatlantist. At least that's what the media call him before he was like
Mm,
elected. Yeah, And for
Yeah.
UK, I think like the military like agreement or like cooperation between like UK and US actually like date back to like the World War II. I think like actually they developed like the F-35 or something like that together. Yeah, it was kind of I think a US UK joint project, and we can also see like across the years like it was like invasion in Iraq. I think it was like UK was it like under Walter Brown or something like
No, it
that.
was under Tony Blair.
Oh, Tony Blair, yeah, UK like sent its soldier like along with US one.
Yeah.
So they do have a, like a more I would say a deeper bond or something like that.
Yeah, it's called the special relationship between
Yeah.
the UK and the US. I think ever since Winston Churchill, they've called it that. But yeah,
Mm.
I think we're slightly digressing, but no, and that's very okay. It's a good discussion. Uh, so what were we talking about? Oh, yes, the analogy. Yeah, so I thought it was a decent analogy. But it also he admits here that we knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strong would exempt themselves when convenient, and et cetera, et cetera. So he's basically admitting some of the hypocrisy that was there in the Western or in the rules-based world order. And it's a hypocrisy that I think it's a hypocrisy and double standards that Chinese media has often talked about, right?
Mhm, yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I think it was quite interesting to see them to see Carney admit so openly to this. So I'm kind of curious, like, to what extent do you think former or previous Western leaders, especially American or really European Canadian leaders, genuinely believed in this rules-based world order, or was it more just yeah? Do you think they genuinely believed in it, or was it just this elaborate scheme um to enhance their control over the world or stuff like that?
Uh, uh, I would say that like per my observation, I think like American foreign policy has been like predominantly uh, motivated by economic interests, and then it was like a support for democracy, and then I think like the third place it was like respect for like global institutions and rules-based order. I do think that to a certain extent that I think like previous American administration would not say that, oh, let's like break orders
Yeah.
for like breaking orders sake, but I think like during some dilemmas, sometimes they do would sacrifice like the world order, even though it was like designed to benefit themselves. And in terms of the European countries, I would say that they slightly upheld more like
Hmm.
international rules and treaties, and I think it's a matter of extent, but still like these rules are already designed for them, and I think the world order is pretty a Western centric one. And even those for those rules that are designed for them, I still think there are certain cases where like those rules are being exempted. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, you talked about democracy. Like, I think democracy or like nation building is also part of the American rules-based world order. For example, the invasion of Iraq. I think it was framed around one was part of it was an extension or a continuation of the war on terror, I think. And
Hmm.
another reason was democracy and like how bad Saddam Hussein was. But
Yeah.
like, a lot of people also say it's about oil. So yeah, so it's kind of complicated, but
Public opinion probably also play a minor part in it. I think actually public opinion was probably more important, or at least as important as the world order. I will argue that way.
mm, yeah. And but it's certain that times have changed because like I don't think Bush, when he started invading Iraq, said anything about the oil. But when Trump captured Maduro, he was like, yeah, it's oil, oil, oil. So certainly times have changed. But
Mhm.
um and why the system no longer so yeah, so the system and why it no longer works is I guess because of Trump. I think that's the reason. But yeah. So basically, in the past, I think US presidents at least acted with the pretense of peace and democracy, like, for example, in Iraq and maybe in Afghanistan. Um, and I personally think they more or less had those ideals in mind. It's like, perhaps at first, I think the grand American foreign policy scheme was probably to use these as pretense to, you know, consolidate their power over the world, perhaps after the end of World War II. But I think gradually, because they teach it in their schools and they talk about it in their politics and on their media, I think over time, gradually, um, you know, the leaders that grew up under this and under this education, they more or less believed in these um ideals, even though perhaps not like 100%, but I think they more or less had these ideals in mind, like international law and human rights and democracy and stuff.
Mhm.
But now, you know, the new U.S. administration is um, laying their intentions very bare, right? For example, now I don't think there's not much talk about getting Greenland anymore, but at least at that time for a few weeks in January, I think early February and probably January,
January,
um,
yeah.
yeah, it was there was no pretense at all, and really just disregard for international law, and it was really just in it was just justified using national security and national interest, um, but also I think quite a bit of personal interest because a lot of people say that Trump's obsession over Greenland is because he wants a personal legacy. I think that's quite true, actually. He can't like win a world war like Franklin Roosevelt did, or he can't do something like Abraham Lincoln did, and he can't found the country like George Washington did. So if he wants to like make a name for himself in history, a good name for himself in history, he's going to have to do something pretty monumental. And I think getting Greenland would be one of them.
Well,
Oh, I was listening to the Chatham House podcast on Trump, and I think one thing that the director of Chatham House said was that she discourages discussions on President Trump's psychology when talking about these international affairs. And I think that's probably a good idea because he seems rather like he changes his opinion rather often. So yeah.
so this also illustrates the importance of behavioral social sciences. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic to study. Yeah.
Okay, that's true. Oh, but one other point I wanted to make is that um I don't think Trump's lack of pretense or his break from traditional US policy is that bad of a thing for Europe and the West. I mean, of course it's a bad thing because the US is like the bedrock of the West, but on the other hand, it's also kind of a wake-up call. I think it's kind of a good thing because it shows them the dangers of relying wholly on the United States, and I think it's gradually going to, at least like for the European countries and for Canada, it's going to serve as a wake-up call for them to perhaps increase their strategic autonomy, whether economically or militarily, so that while they can still cooperate in the future with the US as a close partner, but also be able to um, withstand pressure from it when necessary. And I think that's good for them as like nations. Mm.
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, my take is that actually, I think like back in like 2022, I think a lot of people said like, oh, like the Russo-Ukrainian war is a like a wake-up call for Europe. But I think like at least in the past 3 years, like not much progress has actually been made. Like just
Yeah,
in terms of like pan-European wide progress. So I think it is a wake-up call, but I think that the European Union was just so broken that like it is kind of quite hard to like make any progress, especially like you've seen like Macron who like will reach his term limit and will probably not see another centrist and pro-European leader in an influential country for at least I think a few years to come. Yeah, I kind of doubt that much progress would actually be made. So
well, that's not very good.
yeah, I know it's kind
Then
of pessimist, but yeah.
yeah, Macron. I mean, I only kind of liked him, and he's been the president for quite a long time now, actually. I think ever
Uh,
since I started following politics seriously, he's been president. So
Been
I
since
mean,
2017, yeah, I think.
yeah, that's quite a long time for European countries. I mean, Germany's had quite a few chancellors. So have the UK quite a few prime ministers. So Macron's he's been okay. But yeah, he's the president, so it's kind of different. But yeah. Oh, another point I wanted to make was about the double standards the West,
Hmm?
like the double standards the Western countries had toward China. Like because I mean when Trump started making these threats, the one idea I was thinking is that I think at that point, Trump was a much larger threat to Western countries, at least on paper, than China was. And I think the double standards are quite, like, they're honestly kind of appalling because, I mean, imagine if China started saying that we wanted to take Greenland, or China started saying they wanted to annex Canada or the northern neighbor, which would be Mongolia. Yeah, I think that would be like imagine the international reaction then and
Yeah.
compare with the international reaction now. I just thought the double standards were quite appalling in that situation. But yeah, yeah, it wasn't the best. I don't think it was the best perform. It wasn't the best the Europeans have done. Like it was
But yeah,
not
but I think like in
not
terms of rhetoric, I do think that China also have rhetoric to take over other countries. So, but yes, in terms of action, I think US was definitely much more aggressive in the past
yeah
half a year, I would argue.
yeah it is yeah uh and yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, another question perhaps that we could briefly discuss is
Mhm.
why Trump all of a sudden stopped talking about Greenland. Um I think quite a few reasons. Like what was the main reason? Because like the next day at Davos he said, oh, I'm not going to use military force on Greenland. And I think negotiations are still ongoing, but they're not like making headlines anymore. So do you think like Trump saying that he wanted to take Greenland and not ruling out force was simply a guy's like, his trade of the deal, no, not trade of the deal, art of the deal,
Mhm.
like his art of the deal tact to have a very unreasonable um ask and then start negotiating from that place of power. For example, I think his sanctions were also kind of this logic, or did other factors play into it?
Well, I think that like Trump has always been criticized for having kind of an unpredictable foreign policy. But at the
Yeah,
end of the day, I think he is still like he thinks the way like the normal person would do, thinks the way like other like someone that holds so much power would do. Like he also has advisors, like yeah. But I don't
yeah,
think yeah, Trump maybe like more like have more power in terms of deciding the policy, but like the advisor definitely has input to him. And at the end of the day, Trump went to Penn, right? We've been discussing about that. He did take a
okay.
good education, or
Depend on it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um,
I do yeah, and he also will probably like realize how like devastating the consequence would be. I think Trump surely wants like personal legacy, but he also wants like the Nobel Peace Prize, right? He also doesn't want like the Third World War. Yeah. So I think, yeah, in terms of a rational maker, Trump would not do that. I think Trump is kind of irrational in a way for some of the time. So he will be like, he has to be a lot of more irrational to make the decision. Like, so yeah, I would annex Greenland. That's my take.
yeah. I think it's rather hard to be his advisors because sometimes he like wakes up and has an idea and it's like I can imagine it's very difficult to talk him out of it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think like for the first term, a lot of his advisors are fired. So I do think
yeah,
a
I,
point is that a lot of his advisors are definitely his loyalist, but
yeah,
I'm not very sure about like how loyalist, even as a loyalist, will he like talk to Trump or like say if you like annex Greenland, there will be like some response or like blah 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 response. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm also quite interested into how loyal these people are, like especially JD Vance and Marco Rubio. But I think we can talk about that later. Yeah. And then so the next like there's a very short sentence down here, and that's we are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. And that was a quote from Mark Carney's speech. And I think this boils down to one question, and that's how long will Trumpism last in the United States?
Hmm.
Like, I'm kind of curious whether it's simply a cultural or a systematic change in the United States, a change in belief and change in view of the United of the people, or is it just like um Trump's personal charisma has won over the Republicans and it'll be just a Trump thing and then it'll end after he leaves or not? So
I think for this question, like I am quite divided on that stuff, and I also think a lot of like analysis and think tanks are also divided on this stuff. And yeah, if the Democrat Party the news was the answer, like they will certainly win. But of course, they do not know the answer. So like politics is much more complicated. So yeah.
hmm, yeah, so maybe we can talk about uh the the elections, which is your expertise.
Like I have a few graphs here to like illustrate how Trump is doing like domestically. So like the two graphs are basically for a thing called CPI, which stands for Consumer Price Index. Yeah, and what we can see from the graph is that you can see that for especially in the lower graph from 2021 to like 2024, the CPI has been steadily rising under the Biden administration, partially due to the post-COVID economic situation where they did a lot of inflationary policies that like inject a lot of money into the economic system. So like the inflation is kind of crazy in the United States, and yeah, and the like prices of like households and living are like rising so quickly. Yeah, and yeah, but as we can see, like in the 2025, the CPI is currently still rising, but we can see like in the like December and November, like it's kind of level up. So I think it is a very interesting phenomenon to see. But I think what we can also see is that if you like zoom in and you see the December and November of 2024, and again the December, November of 2023, actually there is a slight decrease every year, like for the last few months, and wondering like how the consumer price index will play out in the next few years. And I think this is also a question like that is extremely influential, like in terms of whether Trump and the the Republican Party can stay in the Congress or stay in the presidency for the next 4 years. Yeah. So why did I choose the consumer price index? I think that like compared to like GDP per capita and other like index, it is like what the voters and what the constituencies care about. Like I think it is more like tangible to like the daily lives of more Americans that they can literally feel it. Like I think one like strong argument for Democrats to lose in 2024 is that it is not the economy is not performing well. In fact, like I think in the late 2024, the economy is still rising, but it's that people like the living standards are still decreasing, and they are feeling the stress of their wallet. So it is it is this that makes them lose the 2024 election. So in terms of the economic performance, I would say Trump is currently uh, on par with his Democratic like President Joe Biden before, and I'm also eager to see like how the economy will play out the next year, because um I think there are still a lot of variables, and we do not know like whether like the full effect of Trump's tariff have significantly kicked in. And I see one really important issue is that I think like for the core supporters of Trump, the economy is like more like important to all other stuff. And I'm saying like the core supporter of Trump, I'm basically speaking of like the white guys that live in rural areas. I think like if the economy is good, I think Trump basically has their support. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
I think they are less sensitive to other issues, to be honest.
yeah, I think that's an interesting point because I've always understood elections in the United States after 2020 to be not an election of Democrat or Republican, but for Trump or against Trump.
Mhm.
Um, and as a result, this led me to believe that Kamala Harris would win the 2024 election, but that obviously didn't happen. So perhaps the economic factor does play a more important role in like contemporary American politics than I think it does, because I personally think that one issue dwarfs all, and that's what you think of Donald Trump. If you think highly of him, then you're going to vote for him. If you don't like him, then you're not going to vote for him. But perhaps it's more complicated than that.
I think I think like when people think low of Joe Biden, it's not like what we seeing like from like short videos or like TikTok.
And his whole life is quite interesting. It deserves a lot of studying. Actually, I think one thing that you can't call Joe Biden is incompetence, because I think he's proven himself to be quite a competent senator and then president. But I think, yeah, the main problem with Joe Biden was mainly his age. I think he was just a little too old and a little too frail looking to continue as presidential candidate. And
Mhm.
so it was quite a pity, honestly. But um, about,
Yeah.
yeah,
What
yeah,
my argument here is that it's not like Joe Biden is not competent or incompetent. What I'm saying here is that Joe Biden is like perceived to be incompetent by many of the
yeah,
voters.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the main issue. It's not only about economic performance, but I also think it's kind of about like communication and like the media and stuff. Maybe that's where they have to like look for. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Trump he does do a good job of galvanizing the public in his favor. Maybe not necessarily in his favor, but galvanizing the public, and some of them uh, do fall in his favor. So um, yeah, but it's complicated.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. So like apart from like economic performance, like Trump has also been doing a lot in terms of like the domestic policy. And like what I mean domestic policy, I'm basically mean like social policy. So I think there's like two key factors that will like hugely affect his like popularity. And I think those two factors are the Epstein files and the Minnesota Act, which of course I'm referring to like the broader eyes clear
Yeah,
down, yeah, and the crackdown. So what's your take on those two issues?
yeah. I think. Well, I mean, of course, I think at least perhaps because I'm slightly like I think most of the things I've seen are, of course, negative toward these two things.
Mhm.
Especially like the things that are happening in Minnesota. Of course, the Democrats are unhappy with it, but I've also seen some, I think, Republicans thinking that it's gone too far because they kind of killed two US citizens. And I mean, frankly, it's not a good scene to see masked men and women on the
Yeah.
streets, like arresting people and breaking into homes. I don't think that's really good to see. But then again, um, Trump supporters did storm the Capitol on January 6th in 2021, and he still won in 2024. So
Mhm.
I think the support of the um, MAGA base toward President Trump is, I would say, it's probably still there. But then again, I think gradually people are turning away. For example, I remember like perhaps just a year ago, the Congresswoman from I think Georgia, um,
Mhm.
Green Taylor, I think
Yeah, Major
she
Taylor
was
Greene. Yeah.
yeah yeah she was a very fervent Trump supporter, but now she's turned against him. So I think gradually because I think gradually his base is kind of eroding, but perhaps it's still enough to win an election. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And yeah, I do think that in terms of Epstein file, it is also like how it plays into the base of like Trump as a like a populist candidate, as an anti-establishment candidate, and how like he is exposed to have like connection with his like some ordinary Americans would consider as a powerful people or like powerful businessman or powerful politician, and I think that's a real issue for him. But on the other hand, I don't think because like I think America is just like so divided right now. I don't. I'm not very sure like if like the Trump's core supporters like could actually like consume media that like portray Trump in a negative way in terms of the Epstein files. So I'm kind of skeptical of that. And in terms of the ICE agent, I think it definitely like uh influenced Trump's like probability and like popularity and especially in terms of I would say the immigrants community, and I think it's like the Latinos in specifically that has seen a drop of support for Donald Trump, and yeah, we will discuss that in the next slide. So shall we move on?
Yeah, yeah. We can move on. But like one last point is, I think it's quite interesting to. I think one thing that's pretty important is whether Trump and his, especially his supporters, whether they're just like racist and anti-immigrant or in general, or is it just, or are they like, is this crackdown on illegal immigrants a guise for their racist and anti-immigrant poise in general, or is it really they just don't like illegals? And I personally think it's more of the prior. I think some of the most extreme supporters are probably rather racist and white supremacist, and that's why they like Trump. So I think they'll continue voting for him. But I think, but I do think his base is slightly eroding a bit. For example, I think Tucker Carlson was also a very strong supporter of Trump, but he's
Mm-hmm.
gradually also turned slightly. So I think Trump is definitely losing some support from people who really believed his doctrines, not doctrines, but his policies, and found out that uh, they aren't completely true. For example, not everything he's doing is completely America first, and some of his things are rather bad for the country. I think so. Some voters, some of his previous supporters, are kind of um, moving away from him after seeing these things, but other more diehard and fervent supporters are still there. And it's interesting to see whether that's going to be enough to win elections and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a good point is that like I think ICE is somehow like legitimizing and somehow institutionalizing some of the like radical right militias and basically like
Mhm.
they recruit them, they train them and turn them into like a whole mega uh militia. So
Or
yeah,
yeah,
that is being paid by the taxpayers. So I think that's one point certainly.
mm,
Yeah, so
yeah,
let's move on. Um Yeah. Few takeaways from the last slide is that first, the America is really divided. It is really polarized. I think this is one of the biggest takeaways. So this also explains that why some people may think like Trump is such a lunatic. But instead, I still think that he do have some solid support, even though like some people may think the same way. And I think the second takeaway is that how we be phrasing the conversation the whole time. So we be talking about what does Trump do and what does Trump do not do. We are no longer talking about like what the Republicans are doing, or like the Republicans are not doing. We are actually basing like poisoning Trump not against like I would say like Gavin Newsom or OAC or somebody else. We are poisoning Trump against the Democrats. So I think that's the bigger picture right now. It's like Trump as like an individual is like so much powerful and influential right now. So I think yeah, when we went into the midterms and possibly also into the next presidential election, so I think hmm, so the situation will be really complicated and yeah. Okay, so I put together several like newspaper headlines and some infographics, and just to like breeze
mm,
through what has happened about the elections in 2025 and what we can anticipate for the midterm. Of course, like some of the like important stuff has also been missing and it's not represented by the graph, but I can also like just talk through. So yeah. So first of all, I think the most uh consequential development in 2025 is basically this like whole battle around like redistricting, and it definitely plays into the midterm next year. So Yeah, so like a few red states, like I think like among them were Texas has added a few Republican seats, and like and what is the other like Republican state that has also been gerrymandered?
No, I only know that California has been gerrymandered.
Yeah, California does.
Although we
I
can
think Ohio.
check
I'm
that.
not. Uh-huh.
We can check that.
I think maybe Missouri added a red seat. I'm not sure about that. I think Ohio has a rejected map for the 2024 or something like that, and it's also
I think North Carolina, Missouri, Utah.
Utah has actually created a democracy, yeah, because of like
Oh,
the
okay.
because of affirmative action and stuff like that.
Okay, I did not know that, but yeah.
Yeah,
But I did read like a paper. I did read an article. I don't know if it's correct or not, saying that the new Republican seats Texas created could be flipped by the Democrats because of things
yeah,
that are
yeah,
happening.
yeah.
But I'm not
That's
sure.
actually the second point I'm coming through. So yeah, so like
Um,
the hue like the redistricting war, I would say is actually like did not have a really huge impact because they are like being offsetted by like Democrats' endeavor in California. So I would not say is much
mm,
of a problem. So, and the second big development in 2025, I will argue, is the elections, mainly in Virginia and New Jersey. Well, we also have the New York City mayor election, and they have a referendum in California to be voted. But I think like the most consequential ones were the ones in Virginia and New Jersey. So I think both of the states saw a sizable shift towards the Democrats, which is expected. Yeah, I think it's basically about a 10-point shift towards Democrats in each of the states. Yeah, you may
mm,
think that the shift is kind of like enormous, but yeah, I'm seeing a graph from New York Times that when you compare to like the shift because like Virginia and New Jersey they hold their state governor election not on the same year as the general election, so there is a time shift that they are always being used as such as an indicator for like the performance, and they are like famously swing states, or at least like not extremely partisan states, at least like in the 21st century. I think like New Jersey has actually shifted between Republican and Democrats governor, and so does Virginia in the past few decades. So I think these really do serve as a good indicator. So we're seeing in the graph is that the shift like towards away from president's party is not as significant as one might expect because we have certainly seen like more major shift in the past few years. But I think
mhm,
this is not to say that life is not that but I do want to emphasize that like Virginia, it is like Washington D.C. is right north of Virginia, and there are like a lot of federal employees living in the Alexandria area, like basically in the Washington D.C. metropolitan area, and they are certainly affected by the by Trump's policy about like shutting down so many agencies and about the shutdowns, and they are definitely against Trump. And in New Jersey, is really a sizable like a Latino population. Like
mhm,
I remember in Princeton, like the hotel staffs were all like Latinos and they only speak Spanish. It was kind of crazy. So what my point here is that like Latinos, I think like through the ICE operations, like I think like Latinos are really like targeted by Trump's action. And I've seen a few analysis that says that Latinos are like aggressively turning away from Trump because frankly, I think like from 2016, especially in states like Florida, where Obama used to carry, like Florida has like turned red. I think whether it's 2016 or yeah 2016. So I think it's really the Trump's effect that pulled the Latinos away from Democrats. But we're seeing like through Trump's like eyes, like Latinos are going away from Republicans. They're shifting towards like Democrats. But even if
mm,
like the Latinos are shifting towards Democrats, like New Jersey shift towards Democrats is not that huge, to be honest, right? Yeah. So the real effect of like a shift towards Democrat, right, might be even smaller than what we see in Virginia and New Jersey. Plus, it's like election in 2025. So maybe we would expect a lot more like Democrats rather than Republicans to turn out. So like as for the midterms, I'm really like skeptical that every state could see such a effect or such a shift towards Democrats as we have seen in Virginia and New Jersey. And I think in the next presidential election, if like other things hold equal, I think the shift towards Democrats might be even smaller than what we are expecting in Virginia and New Jersey. But yeah, that's another thing to discuss.
I think
And
generally, yeah.
yeah,
Please continue.
uh, and what we're seeing in 2026 is that there's been a few, I think, special elections in Texas, and
Mhm.
one shocking news is that I think like somehow a Democrat won Texas. I think it's a Texas state congressional district. Like there was a really like pro-Republican Trump and like a Democrat flipped it. But my statement, I think my point here is that some of the special elections are not really like huge or accurate predictors for midterms or the presidential because like so few people participate in them. So yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, I think generally the midterms, like the party out of power should win the midterms. So the Democrats probably have like I think they should do relatively well, but I don't know. Um, but I think yeah, I think generally the power or the party out of power does do well in the midterms. But I think one thing that Trump has done is like the American public's tolerance toward Trump, I think it's much larger than previous presidents, right? Because Trump's done quite a bit and he's still like not going to lose. He's still a competitor in these elections, but like for example, I remember perhaps like 10 years ago when President Obama wore a tan suit and made national television. So like the tolerance that the American public has for presidents, I think, is undoubtedly going to um improve after this era ends.
Well, like from my perspective, I think this is also an issue about polarization. I will actually claim it is much more due to polarization because I don't think like I think like support for Trump has been like basically negative uh since the first few days. I think it is still the question that the supporters of Trump they consume like right wing like podcasts and right wing media and they portray things different to the liberal medias. And there has been generally like more polarization, and we even see. I think it generally shocks me that they also have to do like an alternative Super Bowl halftime. I was generally so shocked,
Oh
like
yeah.
how divided America is right now. So I think it's more about like polarization, about how like Trump is being portrayed to his supporters that he is like chasing out the immigrants and maybe like if they believe like in like I would say like press secretaries or like
Mhm.
those rhetorics, yeah, I would argue that it's not crazy if you are immersed in that media culture, you will vote for Trump. But yeah, like if you consume a lot of liberal media, it will like be definitely like out of your mind if you're like voting for Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think like most people, like most not so extremely right wing or left wing people in the United States and also the independents, I think they generally like even if like a liberal may generally watch more CNN, I think from time to time they might also take a look at Fox News, and I think it's also probably true vice versa. So I think
Hmm.
for this group of people, I think they might be according to their reaction toward Trump's recent actions, move slightly more to the left than to the right. And also like some things are very difficult to portray. But I must say I do have quite a bit of respect for the White House communications team and how they're doing because I every time I look at their account on Instagram, it all
Hmm.
seems to make sense somehow. But there are some things that are very difficult to whitewash. For example, the recent video Trump posted, it's not easy
Yeah.
to justify that. But yeah,
Yeah. So I think they just could justify it. They
yeah, they
apologize.
could justify it. Yeah,
They actually deleted it. Yeah.
yeah, they,
Yeah.
they justified it first. I think the spokesperson, she justified it first. She said that it was like it was a way of well, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think it was something like it's a way of portraying President Trump's political enemies. But then, yeah, then they took it down because I mean it was not a very good video.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think I agree. Yeah, there are definitely independents in the country, but I'm not also very sure because yeah, I think like the radicals on both sides have definitely gone way more radical than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I also think there's for the independents, there are also a lot of guys who generally does not consume news, I guess, especially in rural areas. So
Mm,
yeah, maybe like somewhere like in Montana or like the Dakotas where like the ice and all the stuff or like pretty none of their business. So
yeah, I used to think that Montana, like the states in the West, like between California and Illinois, those states up there, I used to think they were quite good because um no, I didn't hear much about like gun violence in those states, so I thought it was pretty good to be in those states. But no, I'm not really. I
they are
still
just
really don't know much about them.
extremely rural, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're just that rule. Um, hmm
So yeah, just one last graph, a way to be analyzed. So yeah, so as for the midterm, yeah, we talk so much about like elections in 2025 and the elections in January 2026. So how is Trump and the Republicans faring for the midterms? Well, per my prediction, I think the House is like to a larger degree like going to the Democrats. That's my take right now. And as for the Senate, I think Republicans definitely have a upper hand. Yeah, I
hmm
think like for the Senate, the swing states are North Carolina and um I think North Carolina did they win in 2020? Maybe
I
not. I'm
don't.
not sure.
I
Maybe
have
yeah.
very limited knowledge of U.S. elections.
Yeah, I think North Carolina, especially like their senator is retiring. I do think the Democrats have a chance here. And yeah, like in order for the Democrats to retain control of the Senate, they need 4 more seats. So they but they also need to keep Georgia, which I think might be a problem for them, but I'm still not sure because like Georgia went to Trump for 2024. So
Hmm.
yeah, and to
Um,
really like flip the coin, you flip like the control of the Senate, you need Maine. Like Maine is like I think it's a pretty liberal state, and I've been there myself. It's really really liberal. But the thing is, they have the senator like Susan Collins was a moderate Republican, and she's been there like for quite some time. And as for now, she is undecided whether to run or not. But I'm not. I think there's a chance that Democrats may flip the seats, but I think that's still not very decided yet because like every 6 years, like when Susan Collins is getting like have to do a new election, like people will say that she will lose a seat because Maine, is such a liberal state, but every time she did survive. So, but I do think that Democrats' chance of getting Maine is significantly higher this year than any other years. So not yes, and we also have Michigan and Minnesota. Yeah, but after I think what happened in Minnesota, Minnesota will probably be Democrat this year. So
yeah, I have a very limited understanding of U.S. elections. Yeah, for example, in my view, I think like Minnesota, Michigan, and like Maine should be very blue states, but it seems that they're not. Um, but one thing is like if the Democrats get the House, then Trump's going to get impeached quite a bit the next year, isn't he? The next 2 years.
I think the broader picture is that like for the New England states, they are quite liberal, but I think like in terms of their but for demographics, they are predominantly white and they are also very, very rural. Actually, I think I just checked like just before we are doing this podcast, they have one of the lowest urbanization rate across the whole state. And we know that like urbanization is kind of like the most I would say that education and urban or rural is one of the most important indicators for whether you are a Democrat or Republican. So, in a sense, I think that New England states are much less liberal than some of people may think, because I think New Hampshire still has a Republican governor, like for now. So yeah, and they have a lot of like Republican like senators and like representatives in the past few years. And I even think that New Hampshire and Maine is definitely a lot less liberal than you think. And
Yeah,
as for Michigan and Minnesota, I also think that the urbanization rate is not that high and the population is predominantly white. So it's not that blue either. And so for the Democrats to actually flip the Senate, they actually have to get either Ohio, Texas, and Alaska. They have to get 2 out of those 3 states, which I think are
that's
quite
pretty
hard.
impossible.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
Alaska and Texas has been shifting towards Democrats this year gradually, and Ohio and another potential state, Florida, has been shifting towards Republicans this year. But yeah, as I said, an important issue would definitely be the Latino, especially in Texas and Florida, where there are like huge Latino populations in there. Yeah.
why did the Latinos turn toward Trump in the first place? Like, was he very
Not,
pro-Latino? Don't think so.
I'm not very sure, but yeah,
I thought like
yeah,
minorities would be against Trump, but
yeah.
okay.
But Trump did seem to do really well with Latinos in 2024. So yeah.
But okay, yeah. Then the Senate seems rather hard for them to get. I think Ohio and these
Yeah,
states sound like very red states, but okay.
Ohio actually I think is a bit less red. Um, it did vote
Is
for
it?
Obama. Yeah, and for the Ohio, it like its incumbent was like replacing JD Vance. So like I think the seniority of the incumbent in Ohio would be definitely less than those running in Texas and especially Alaska. And Alaska,
Mm-hmm.
I think is like really like they have served in the Senate a lot. So although like we have constantly talk about elections as a like a popularity poll for Trump, but I do think that the particular candidates that are running for election still matter, whether it's their like leanings or is it their like seniority. This still matters in election.
Yeah, yeah. And I think another example with my limited knowledge of American election politics would be, I think the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro.
Mhm.
Like Pennsylvania is a swing state, but he wins pretty comfortably.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's also a point about about like election is. I think like election is supposed to be like you vote for the candidate that fits for the fit, and I think there are actually some like thesis about how like national politics is being like how do I say like permeates into like local politics and maybe like making
Hmm.
local politics like less functional than before. There are also talks about this.
Yeah, yeah, because the votes matter in the Senate.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, and I think even though if the Democrat did take the Senate, I'm not sure about the impact on at least like limiting Trump's action, because like theoretically he could just veto all the bills, right? But I think this will definitely will influence. But in terms of the degrees, like it might like do budget stuffs, but in terms of foreign policy, I think Trump basically can do whatever he wants, I think.
Yeah, but I think like if the Democrats get, I'm not well acquainted with the U.S. the Congress either, but I think if Democrats get the House, it's going to be very difficult for Trump to pass legislation, even though
Yeah.
he hasn't really. I read a piece on CNN saying that this administration has been very bad at passing legislation, even with both the House and Senate. But like, if the House is Democrat, then he's going to like it's going to be very, very difficult for him to pass legislation, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, and I actually think one of the other argument here is that Trump is basically like less inclined to like pass legislation. That I
Yeah,
just
he
think
likes
like
using
he used
executive
to,
orders.
yeah, yeah. But on the other side of the coin, I think even Democrat did not get an outright majority, they only get, let's say, like 49 or 50, I think the Republicans' ability to do stuff they like will definitely be impaired still.
Yeah, because it'll be defectors and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Especially like Susan Collins, like from Maine, from the more liberal Republican seats. Yeah.